Okay. World fisheries are under real threat. So it is very important that everybody, governments, private sector, local fishermen, artisanal fishermen, all be careful about the exploitation of these resources. Everybody has a role to play, but it has to be regulated by governments and it has to be controlled by governments. Now, governments have different policies, and there is no straitjacket that can be applied across the world. What is important to be applied everywhere is the precautionary measures that are needed to make sure that there is a good continuum of the system.
Sir, the economics of environmental conservation proposes that if the stakeholders bear the social cost, there the amount of pollution can automatically be reduced. Do you think in the case of fisheries, privatizing them and then imposing some kind of carbon tax will be a solution to it?
Okay, there are different ways of privatization. I think we have to be very clear about it. It is very important if governments decide to give more power to local fishermen and to artisanal fishermen. It is very important that that type of privatization be looked upon. It is certainly a positive thing to do because it is easier to control, and most likely these people will care about the resources that are theirs. When you privatize and you have large corporations coming from other parts of the world, profits would be the main reason for their interventions. So it is not very clear how accountable they would feel in actually preserving the resources that they're exploiting. They come and go, and they have contracts and they actually respond to these contracts. Most of the time, developing countries do not have capacities to negotiate good contracts and don't have the capacities to enforce the implementation of these contracts. So coming back to your question about carbon taxes and so forth, again, one has to look at the whole system, not at just one particular section of it. It is something that needs to be considered, but I think for the local community, especially for developing countries, what is very important is to make sure that the system is maintained, that we do not look at short-term gains against long-term solutions for the local communities. So whether there are carbon taxes to be applied, why not? It is something that should be considered, especially for big companies. Whether it should be applied in all parts of the world, certainly it has to be considered. But again, the main question here is, what is our goal as main ambition is to make sure that we have sustainable systems and we exploit things in a sustainable way, and that we try to ally short-term gains to have a good synergy between the need to have gains with the need to actually maintain the system for longer term and for future generations.
Right, sir. So in your presentation, you gave an example. You gave the example of the London city, where the ecological footprint is immense. Requires more than 100 London cities to feed one London city. In that case, do you think there's a problem of distribution, and should the governments take up policies which restricts the resources to one region, which is sort of going farther away from the elements of globalization?
No, I don't think restrictions would be the solution. We need to feed people in the cities. All cities of the world only represent 3% of the land mass, which is okay. And they need to be fed. They need energy, they need transport, they need to live decently. And it is clear that they cannot produce in the 3% land mass they live in. So obviously they will have to actually use products that are coming from elsewhere. That's not the issue. The issue is the lifestyle in the cities is not commensurate with the capacities of the planet to actually generate the resources that we need. So the question is, how can we work, we as people living in the cities, to actually reduce our footprint? How can we reduce the food we waste? How can we reduce the consumption of water that we don't need? Do we need to leave the tap open as we brush our teeth, or can we stop it? Can we reduce our footprint in terms of transport if not needed? Can we carpool, or can we use public transport? That's basically the question. So if a normal citizen in North America has the lifestyle that they have, and someone from India or from Saudi Arabia tries to copy that lifestyle, we will need 7 planets to actually respond to our needs. That's the question that we have at hand. I don't think the matter is to see regulations. It is very important, as we all know, the tea we consume in London or the coffee we actually consume in Geneva is not produced in London or in Geneva. They are produced somewhere else. That's right. That is absolutely right. There is no problem with that. The problem simply is to say how much of that is actually sustainable, and what is our demand. Can we as citizens make sure that we consume products that have less footprint, or can we actually reduce our own footprint as citizens living in cities?
Right. So on this, my argument is that when there is a resource which is available in abundance, then we do not tend to optimize our usage. For example, if we do not have enough water, we'll put it to the most necessary use. Similarly, do you think it's important to restrict the availability of abundant resources?
Again, let me just say that the issue of abundance is always associated with scarcity. Abundance somewhere in the world goes hand in hand with scarcity of that same resource somewhere else. So what is important is that when we discuss these policies at the global level, that we look at the whole picture. Again, the banana we consume in New York is certainly produced somewhere else in Latin America. So what is the impact of that consumption into the Latin American systems? Is the citizen of New York, should they be as responsible, as accountable to the exploitation of the forests in Costa Rica or in Venezuela as they should be for the forests in the US? This is basically where we have, as a community, we live in one planet, we live in one village, and we should be very careful about about our lifestyle. Again, abundance is something that is extremely relative, because most of the time, abundance of resources, especially precious resources, lead to conflicts. We know that if you superimpose the map of abundance of minerals and conflicts in the world, especially in developing countries, you see that there are a lot of correlations. Look at the situation in Africa, the diamonds of Liberia and Sierra Leone, the coltan of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Look at the oil in South Sudan and what it does in terms of fueling conflicts. Abundance is something that is very relative, because whatever is abundant somewhere is actually missing somewhere else in the world. We as a community have to look at it as a coherent system. Similarly, we know that scarcity of resources also leads to conflicts. Look at the situation in Sudan, in Darfur, where scarcity of water, scarcity of access to land leads to conflict, because people fight for this land and between pastoralists and farmers. So it is all relative. Whatever is abundant somewhere could be missing somewhere else. Now, again, the importance of these conventions, international conventions, is to allow us to look at the system as a whole, rather than look at it from in a piecemeal basis.